Greetings and welcome to week 7. This is lecture 4. This is the last lecture for this particular week. I want to spend a little bit of time talking to you about the 3 words that John Perkins uses, that the CCDA has embraced, the Christian Community Development Association, as means through which community development and transformation can really begin to take place. And I think this is the key for us as we recognize that we are called to be our brothers and sisters keepers, that we're called to take seriously the personal relationships we develop, recognizing those elements that we've talked about that sometimes sabotage our ability to neighbor well. We also need to understand our engagement of the place itself. And John Perkins is a pretty significant advocate of recognizing the need for relocation. That's a huge word for us. And if you remember Pastor Irene's story, she sort of tips her hat towards that. She helps us understand the potential for that. When you seek to be with and recognize the holiness that is found in simply the ministry of presence, that you want to be with and live around those you seek to serve and minister to and come alongside in the neighborhoods that you seek to transform. Churches typically opt for a safer approach than that. We're going to move in and establish a program or establish an outreach, but we're going to stay back and stay where we are. Now, again, I recognize, please hear me. I know that there are certain communities that it is easier to live in than others. I also recognize that there are certain moments of life or seasons in life where it might not be advantageous or even practical to live in certain contexts. I'll use my own example. My wife and I have always wanted to move to a major metropolitan area, but we felt for us and as a family, even given opportunity to a couple different times, we felt that for us as a family, given the season that we were in ministry, in life, in with my education, that the move to a metropolitan area probably wasn't going to happen while our kids were in the different stages of their lives. And so when an opportunity came up, post-kids, and when they had moved in, we were then empty nesters, we took advantage of that season. So some of you are moving into seasons where some of those shifts and relocations will be more difficult than others, or will at least look different than they might in a different season. So I recognize that. But there is something about being proximate to, putting on the flesh of, living into the actual neighborhood itself. We sent out a church planter by the name of Seth Major and his wife Ty. We sent them out from our church in Pekin in Bridgeway, and they were going to go plant a church in the second most underserved area in Peoria. The district had bought a parsonage, and they were living in that parsonage in a fairly nice neighborhood. I mean, it wasn't anything spectacular. Middle class, definitely. Not even upper middle class, just solid middle class neighborhood in Peoria. It was a good house, good neighborhood. As they began to set up shop in the second most underserved neighborhood in the community, they began to realize there was a disconnect from where they were living to where they were serving. He's also one of the workers that helps operate the Dream Center, which is a homeless outreach in the Peoria area as well. And there was a deep disconnect he felt from where he was staying every night to where he was ministering every day. And he felt like in order to have cred in that community, because if that church is going to grow, it's not going to come from drive-ins. It's going to come from the neighborhood itself, which I'm going to tell you that is hard soil where he's at. And it's going to require him to till and till and till. Now, it's easy for us to just blame the soil and say, man, the soil's no good. Oh, we shouldn't have been here. No, the work of the gospel is sometimes to do the hard work of tilling the soil up. And here's a lot of soil that he's going to be tilling up over the next several years in order to see real significant change and outreach to that community. But he also realized in order to have cred in that community, he's got to be there. He's got to move. So he and his wife in the church bought a house just a few blocks from where the church is, and in an area of the community where some would have said, "What are you doing? Why are you moving there?" And for him, he recognized for him to minister as a neighbor, he had to be a neighbor. And so he made the commitment, and he and Ty made the commitment, and they're about to welcome their first child here in June. They made a commitment to moving in, to settling into, and being present in the community in which they serve. And that idea of relocation, the idea of being present in, makes a huge difference. I care about the entire city of Chicago. Given my district role, I find myself moving throughout many communities. But when people talk about my community, I talk about my neighborhood. This is the neighborhood that I feel like God has placed us in. And we have a unique outreach to this community and how we build those relationships and how we forge long-lasting connections. This is our neighborhood. My wife and I have looked over the next 25 years of our lives and even the potential of moving out of a parsonage and then maybe someday buying a place. We want to buy in this neighborhood because we believe that God has planted us here. And we believe that we forge these relationships within the context of this neighborhood, and we do outreach in that neighborhood. And I think all of that is absolutely essential and important. The second one of this is not just relocation, but it's also redistribution. Now, if you heard Pastor Irene, they've opted for the language of reinvestment, this idea that there are disparities in certain communities, and learning how to leverage resources in a meaningful way to reduce the disparities is a huge deal. Now, redistribution can feel like a threat for some people who see that as some sort of socialist tactic. But I don't think that that's what we're driving at. What we're trying to do is create equal opportunity, constructing bigger platforms that are more inclusive to a lot of different kinds of people and voices, eliminating some of the barriers for mobility and for growth and for economic development, being intentional about the programming that we do in a community, in a neighborhood, that might embrace those who might have a greater difficulty taking steps and strides towards increasing their overall well-being and flourishing. So redistribution takes seriously the call to recognize those disparities and do something about those disparities. So this goes back to the story that I was telling in the last lecture. What does it look like then to say we have a neighborhood that has resources but no youth outreach in the community? Is there a way to redistribute or reinvest the resources in our community to invest in something that might not curb the immediate crime issue, but might change the tenor and tone of things over the course of the next 3 to 5 years? Do we have the intentionality to make those kinds of decisions? One of the things that I feel about my role in this community is we have a lot of people who are very well-to-do in our community, and who are, they have good hearts and willingness to help out as well, but they don't always know where to give and how to give. So in the connections that I make, in the relationships that I forge with pastors and leaders and nonprofits, how can we leverage the generosity and the capital that's found in our community for the sake of other initiatives? That's a part of the redistribution. How do we partner in our community to create co-ops and cooperatives that are meaningful shared experiences that really lift up the community itself? Is there engagement that the church can do in terms of housing? In some communities, cities own rundown houses that churches can buy. I can think of a community in Philadelphia that the Simple Way organization by Shane Claiborne was buying houses literally for $1. And they were fixing up these houses and turning them into safe havens for people to be able to move into, low-cost housing that people could gain access to and move forward in life. Are there community gardens that we could start, food pantries or food co-ops that we can create? What are the opportunities that we have to redistribute or reinvest into the community, the wealth, and to minimize the disparities that keep people bound in social strata that are not helpful for our full participation in the redemptive missions of God? And that leads to the third, which is this idea of reconciliation. That within the context of any community, there are divisions and there are fractures and fissures that run through the community. What does it look like for the church to embody a place of peace and peacefulness in that community that seeks to heal the wounds from the community that may exist from decades and decades ago? How do we as the church posture and position ourselves to mend the divisions or mend the torn fabric of relationships? How do we begin to help make that shift and to move forward in meaningful ways in these communities? Who do we need to bring together at the table? What kind of conversations we need to help forge? How does our church bear witness to a reconciled community? When people walk into our churches, do they see this is the kind of church that can heal the divisiveness that so often keeps us apart from one another? These are all the kind of questions that I think we begin to ask as we begin to take seriously the context of our community. Do I live there? Which means, am I there? Like, do I really fully participate? Am I willing to think creatively about shrinking the disparities and investing in opportunities, redistributing and reinvesting wealth? And then third, do we bear in our lives the recognition that within our communities and neighborhoods, there is a sense of fracturedness at times? And in what ways and how do we bring healing to those fractured spaces? So this is this week's lecture. It helps us, again, understand the context of our community. And we have one more week. It's hard to believe. And we will have just a couple finish-up lectures from that final week. And we'll extend this even further beyond just the nature of our neighborhoods. So thanks and have a great week.